Welcome. My name is Cheryl Jefferson Bell. I serve as pastor of Community Justice, and it's an honor to be here with you this evening. We welcome each of you to this continuation of becoming the beloved community, and we are following this series, this second series, behind the original of Becoming Beloved Community that was led by Pastor Tino Herrera and assisted by Pastor Daryl Burton. It was 4 weeks of exploration, learning, growing, and it left us wanting for more. And so we have begun this second half of going deeper. And last week we began with a panel of some members from the drafting team of Resurrection's Vision for Racial Justice. And we focused on and talked about the phrase or mantra, Black Lives Matter. Tonight, as we go deeper, we will explore systemic racism and unpack whiteness. Now, there's no way to cover these topics thoroughly, but we are blessed to have two persons with us who have a passion for these topics, and they are going to help us to go deeper and to think more deeply about these topics. So I'd like for you, Stewart, who is my partner during this series of Going Deeper, to introduce himself and share the names of our guests. But first, let us pray. Oh, Lord our God, thank you for your love, your grace, and your mercy. And we ask for your presence to be with us and with all those who are sharing in this time with us. Open up our hearts and our minds and our spirits, oh God, to you, so that we may grow and learn to be more like you would want us to be as we live out the vision of your kingdom here on earth as it is in heaven. And we lift this all up in the mighty name of Jesus Christ, our living Savior. And everyone said together,
Amen.
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 Hello, I'm Stewart Curtright, and I work in the local mission department, and I'm here on the Leawood campus, and thank you for being with us tonight. I'd like to introduce our two guests with us this evening. We have Pastor Lauren Baker Thomas, who is one of our congregational care pastors, and we also have former Judge Kevin Moriarty, who is with us, and we appreciate you being here. Kevin was the chief judge of the 10th district, and so we really appreciate your presence here tonight.
Thank you.
So I'm Pastor Lauren. I work in congregational care as one of your pastors. You might have seen me around if you have attended the 7:30 or 11 a.m. services before everything went online. And tonight I have the privilege, pun intended, of talking to you about whiteness and white privilege and white fragility. So I want to begin by saying I really have a heart for this. I think that when we know more, we can grow. And when we can see outside of ourselves and start to see the perspectives that have been built by history and the perspectives of the people around us who are different from us, we can start to create a society that looks more like the kingdom of God and influence change in policy and in our personal lives. So this is going to be going deeper, but it is also on the level of knowledge, but it's also going to be going deeper emotionally. So I want you all to stick with me. I am going to do the best that I can to give grace and compassion to where our country has come from, but we're going to be talking about a lot of difficult history, and so I just ask that you would be with me in that and know that some of these things are really hard to learn, and that I am there with you. We all are there with you in that sorrow for how racial injustice came about, but there is hope for what we can do next, and so I hope that's where we'll get. So I'm going to start with the tough stuff, and we'll go from there. We'll build to hope. So, whiteness. What is whiteness? I think to ask that question, we have to start at the beginning of the construct of race. I would say in the 15th and 16th centuries was when the concept of race really started to emerge. Before that, things were just different cultures, and people had different colors to their skin, but what it meant to be a slave or a servant was more about your economic status and your criminal record than it was about your race or the color of your skin. The two things were not necessarily associated. But when the slave trade began and it really took hold in Europe, we started to see associations of people who were darker with being uncivilized and people who were lighter being civilized. So in Europe, in that time period, when the colonists started coming over to the New World, they came from this society where they believed that because they had the Christian religion, because they were a part of this civilized society, that they were superior, that they were the people who were civilized, and that everyone in undiscovered territories whom they didn't understand, who didn't speak the same languages that they did, who didn't have the same kinds of religions that they had, were uncivilized. They would even call them barbaric. So as these colonists were coming over, the first people that they met at the shores of the American colonies were Native American people. And they believed that as a Christian society, as a civilized society, it was their duty to help teach the Native American people about Christianity, what they thought was the true way, right? And they also believed that to do that, they had to bring them into civilized society. They had to teach them what it was to be a civilized person as they understood it. Unfortunately, that was exploited a lot of the time because the American dream in coming to the colonies was not only a freedom of expression of your religion, but it was also an economic dream. It was a dream to have your own land, to be in this wild, undiscovered territory, to kind of have your own economic freedom, to own property, and to be able to work it and create the economy from the ground up. So those two dreams going together ended up creating exploitation of the Native American people. A lot of Native American people died of exposure to European diseases that they hadn't encountered before, but most of those who didn't, who the European colonists encountered, ended up becoming indentured servants. But they weren't really treated like all the other indentured servants had been in Europe. They were kept on as servants for the entirety of their lives, and many people worked them to death. They were essentially the first slaves in America. And that labor force dwindled because of disease. So where the African slave trade comes in for the United States of America is when we didn't have the labor to sustain all of the booming economy from the agriculture that was happening, we had to turn somewhere else. Now, I know that's a lot of history, but trust me, we're getting to a place where this really matters for today, because this is the root of it, right? So we bought in, as Americans, we bought into the transatlantic slave trade, and that meant that shiploads of African people were being abducted, were being lured in, and were being taken by violence away from their homes and their villages and brought to America forcibly. And the same concept applied for the colonists. They thought it's our duty as civilized people and Christian people to help African people understand what it is to be Christian, what it is to be civilized. And the way that we'll do that is we will have them as laborers, and we will teach them when they're associated with us. That was the theory. Again, not how it worked. A lot of the time there was exploitation. There was brutality by people who would say that they were Christian, and then they would go and they would treat African people as if they were property and not human beings. And this idea of being uncivilized, as it became more and more associated with being dark-skinned, as more and more African people were brought over against their will to America to be slaves, we ingrained these values on people's lives in our society. The people who had light skin were civilized, they were Christian, they had their freedom, and they were fully human. And none of that was said about people who were dark-skinned. And it became this cycle where to justify continuing slavery, to justify the way that people were worked to the bone and worked to death and families were ripped apart, we said, and this was a real Christian pro-slavery argument, we said slavery was never condemned in the Bible. Of course, it looked a lot different then, and it was not based on race. People said that it was their Christian duty to civilize Black people coming to America, and thus they were really doing a service by keeping slaves, even if they treated them horribly. Those excuses, in with the need for economic booming, for the labor to keep that running, it got us into these silos, these ingrained hierarchies. I say all that to say that this is the fabric of our society. Our economy from the very beginning counted on free labor from people who didn't choose that path. It counted on people having to be brought over from Africa, and then we assigned them value, not based on their lives, not based on the integrity of their lives or their own capacity, but based on what was convenient for us. And that is a history that we have to bear. We are born not into a blank slate. I think that's often the misconception that I hear the most when we talk about racism, which is really prejudice plus power, is that we're born with a blank slate, that we can make whatever we want of ourselves, that we all can pull ourselves up by the bootstraps and have the American dream. But in reality, we're born into this history that is difficult, that is sad, that has assigned value to people based on the color of their skin. We're born into a history that is ongoing. You know, I think about how we believe that God has moved throughout history, that our story as Christians is building, and it has been building since Adam and Eve. And if that's true, then that's also true of our society. And what we've done with that is ingrain value, this idea of value for people's lives. That is the fabric. And you can manipulate that fabric any way you like, and we have tried many, many different ways over the years, but we're still working with the same fabric. So coming up, just has a lot of history. Give it a second, let it sink in.
Breathe.
Yes. So coming up on the Civil War, this is where the idea of, to me, the origin of white fragility really comes in. Coming up to the Civil War, people who were using slave labor were justifying it, and they were doing whatever they could to cling to that, not just because of this idea of inherent value, but also because that was their livelihood. That was their American dream. If they didn't have the labor to sustain their lifestyle, then, you know, they may very well either have to go back to Europe, or they may have died because the country wouldn't have had the crops that it needed to continue to go on. So that is where a lot of anger kind of came in around wanting to get rid of slavery. And to me, with that anger comes justification. And we see this even today, right? When something is threatened, we get angry and we justify it. And I think that is the foundation of white fragility, is not understanding why something is wrong or being taken away, and justifying it without learning any different. So we, as our economy has kind of been based in slave labor, our country was never built to work without it, which is devastating. I mean, that is completely devastating to think that that the foundation of our country is based on the idea that Black people are of less value. And to sustain that economy, albeit maybe with great intentions for the most part, we have recreated that kind of labor in different ways since the Civil War, where slaves were freed. After the Civil War, after Reconstruction, there was voter suppression so that Black people couldn't influence policy. There were loitering laws where people who didn't own property, and so they were out kind of on the street not doing anything, that was considered illegal. And those people, the punishment was that they would be taken to be indentured servants at a white person's farm. So essentially bringing them back into slavery. Then you had Jim Crow laws, and the separate but equal really was kind of white people saying, we only want to pay for ourselves, and we don't want to pay to support the economy of Black people. And finally, I would say the modern instance of it for us now is mass incarceration that's come out of the war on drugs. And Kevin, you know a lot more about this than I do. I don't know if there's anything that you want to say about the laws around the war on drugs and how that's racially influenced.
Yeah, I'll talk a little bit about that because you're absolutely right. And it was probably an unintended consequence of their action, but it certainly does have a giant impact.
Yeah. Yeah, and so here we find ourselves kind of in this cycle of where our roots have been, how we're trying to manipulate the fabric of our society. Like I said, we're still just manipulating the same fabric. We're pushing it into different avenues, but we're still using that same fabric that was based on white people are civilized and people who are dark are uncivilized or barbaric, and they don't deserve as much. They're not worth as much. It's nothing based on anything on a personal level. So I know we wanted to go into modern examples. I'm not sure how much time we have for that, but turn
You're
it
doing
to
well.
Cheryl.
Okay. So for a modern day example of what white fragility looks like, racism looks like, we want to show you, for those who haven't seen it, and even if you have, we're gonna want to show you a video from an incident that happened in Central Park between two persons, Amy Cooper and Christian Cooper, and they're not related.
No relation.
No relation. And this has to do with him requesting that she put her dog on a leash because there was regulations that said you need to keep your dog on a leash because it was a bird watching area of the park. And so we want to show you this video so you can see firsthand what this looks like.
Please don't come close to
And
me.
I'm taking a picture and calling the cops.
Please call the cops. Please call the cops.
I'm going to tell them there's an African-American man threatening my life.
Please tell them whatever you like.
Would you please stop? Sir, I'm asking you to stop.
Please don't come close to me.
Sir, I'm asking you to stop recording me.
Please don't
stop.
come close to me.
Please take your phone off.
Please don't come close to
And
me.
I'm taking a picture and calling the cops.
Please call the cops. Please call the cops.
I'm going to tell them there's an African-American man threatening my life.
Please tell them whatever you like.
Excuse me? I'm sorry, I'm in the Ramble, and there is a man, African-American, he has a bicycle helmet. He is recording me and threatening me and my dog. There is an African-American man, I am in Central Park. He is recording me and threatening myself and my dog. And my... I'm sorry, I can't hear you either. I'm being threatened by a man in the Ramble. Please send the cops immediately. I'm in Central Park in the Ramble. I don't know.
Thank you.
Now, I understand that this video was submitted by Christian's sister, Melody. She's the one that put it on social media. And also, Amy did end up asking for forgiveness for what she had done. My understanding that she did lose her job and her dog in this process, and Christian accepted the apology. Not so sure about whether the other losses that she experienced were, warranted that incident. But again, and this was in the midst of the George Floyd and all these things were happening together. So, Lauren.
Yeah, I wanted to talk about this video because to me it's personal. I saw this, and I was crawling in my skin, and more than anything, from shame, because Amy Cooper's white. I'm white. Amy Cooper's a woman. I'm a woman. Look, I even have a dog. I could be walking in Central Park if I lived in New York. And I think what a small step it is to go from a normal interaction to this kind of interaction where all of the prejudices and all of the ingrained systems of violence come up all at once. Because she's playing into, and I think without knowing it, I really do, that she's playing into this idea of a white woman as a damsel and to the police, and while doing that, she's wielding the power of her race to get other people, in this instance the police, up in arms, and to, in some way, like, work in the realm of condescension of I have power and you don't, when it comes to when she's speaking directly to Christian Cooper. You know, she says, you will stop recording me. I mean, it is very forceful. And I think she believes that she has the ability to make him stop. I don't know how you believe that, other than it's about race, because, I mean, she's smaller than him. He's recording. I mean, there's nothing physically that would say that she should be able to tell him what to do, right? And yet she believes that she can. That comes out of our history. And to play this card of getting on the phone with people who she knows have power over this man, and changing her story from, first of all, she says African American or Black at least 3 times. She begins with that. And that is to raise a flag to say, expect violence, or come to my rescue knowing that this is what's happening. And she changes from I have power over you to I'm completely powerless in this situation. Come help me. And she, by the end, is screaming and pleading. I mean, that is not the same tone of voice that was happening when it was just her and Christian Cooper, who is an African-American man, as she stated in anger multiple times. That, for her not to have to think about that, not to have to think about how she acts in that situation, not to think about how her power is wielded, that's not only privilege, but that is privilege and power together, and that is a really dangerous situation. And so, you know, we have to be, I think, vigilant as people who are white. We have to be vigilant about where we've come from, what our history is, and how those inherent biases infect all of us. They're there because they were there when our country started. They're there because they're in our systems. They're not necessarily there because we act in racist ways, but they are there. And as Amy Cooper found out the hard way, you know, in panic, they will come out. And that is exactly what it's white people's responsibility to stop. It's our responsibility to stop that from happening within ourselves, and to speak out when we see it happening, when we see power wielded because of our race by other white people. We're the people who can speak about it and who can say, hey, that's wrong. And I know you didn't mean it. I want to give you all the compassion in the world, but you have power over this person's life that you don't realize.
Well, thank you, Lauren. That was an amazing journey you took us on.
600 years of history.
I know, like, in that amount of time. So
Right.
thank you for unpacking whiteness, and Stewart and Kevin.
Yeah, thank you, Lauren. I'm really glad that you were the special guest, because I don't think I could have explained that much that well that quickly. And I'm going to have to think about some of those examples, because you really unpacked that well. So thank you so much. So I invited Kevin to be with us tonight because when I got involved in the church's prison ministry, which is now called Res Reentry, about 4 years ago, prior to 4 years ago, I think I'd heard the phrase mass incarceration, but being that it did not directly impact me, I didn't think it directly impacted me, I didn't really think about it much. But then when I got involved in Res Reentry here at Church of the Resurrection and started going inside the walls and started confronting and seeing some things that I previously had not experienced and hadn't seen. I had lots of questions about our prison system and about the laws, and then I started seeing that in 1972, we had 200,000 people incarcerated, but in 2020, we had 2.3 million people. And it began to put me on this journey of how in the world did we go from 200,000, and this would be in my lifetime, from 200,000 to 2.3 million. And instead of me giving you a 30,000-foot view of that, that's why I wanted to invite a former judge to come in and talk to us a little bit about the law, and not only how we got there, but how it also disproportionately affects the poor and people of color.
Thank you. I also have a passion for this type of communication with all types of folks, because I believe that injustice for some of us is injustice for all of us. And it just doesn't have to do with people of color. It could have to do with anything from ethnicity to LGBTQ to your religious affiliation. So this is been a passion of mine, just in making sure that there's some justice in our criminal justice system. And by the way, I believe that there is. I believe that our criminal justice system is set up to work. It does work. Certainly there's failures, and I'll explain how that happens. What I'm going to tell you is that there is what I call a sad circle of life, and it has to do primarily with poverty and how it impacts those folks that are disenfranchised and poor. And of course, we know that people of color, especially black people, are the most disenfranchised and are the most affected by poverty as a general population percentage. So I'm going to give you some other information first, and I know that this is a sensitive time in our culture and in our history, and I know that there are over 700,000, closer to 800,000 police officers in the United States. I believe that by and large, they do a great job, that they are hardworking servants that place their life on the line each and every day that they work. But with every group of individuals, whether it's a pastor or a police officer or a judge or a lawyer or a doctor, there's going to be some percentage of those in that career field that miss the mark. And that's certainly the situation with the police officers as well. I also know that if you have, as a judge, 1,000 cases, you're going to miss the mark sometimes. And that's not to be unexpected. Just think about it. If you're a manufacturer of some item and you made 1,000 widgets and you only had one bad widget, you would consider that a success, that you've done a good job, that you only had one bad widget. Unfortunately, if you're a judge or you're a prosecutor or somebody involved in the criminal justice system, having one mistake has a rippling effect that's much greater than just one widget. So I'm going to give you some facts, so I'll have to look at my notes from time to time to show you how the system, what we see it as now. What we know is that approximately 13.4% of our population in the United States are black. We also know that, as Stewart said, approximately 2.3 million people are currently incarcerated. And when I say incarcerated, that could be two different ways defined, as Stewart mentioned. There is prison, and prison is both state and federal. So there's 2.3 million people in state or federal prison. Prison is after you've been sentenced on a felony. You also heard the term jail. Jail can be a holding facility while you're awaiting to be tried, pre-detention holding, or it could be, if it is a lesser offense like a misdemeanor, you are sentenced and you go to jail, and you're there, you're incarcerated in jail, but it's not considered a prison. So when we're talking today, we have to know that incarceration can be several things. A more amazing number is that there are 3 million people at any given time in custody. That could be jails, it could be prisons, both federal or state. The after you get out of jail or after you get out of prison, there's probation or parole, depending on where you are and if it's in federal court or state court. Those people are what we refer to as folks in the system. So people that are in the system are either in custody or post-release, but still on paper or on probation of some sort. A staggering number is there's 6.8 million people in the system at the current time. In 1970, as Stewart said, our population was a number that was consistent with our population within the world. Today, by the way, we are by and far, we have the most folks in custody per 100,000 than anyone, more than China, more than Russia. There isn't anybody that comes close to us. We are by far the most incarcerating country in the world. But another staggering fact is that since 1970, our prison population has increased by 700%. And that's for everybody. That's people in general, which should make you wonder what's going wrong. Something is amiss for that to happen. Even though the black population is only about 13.4%, between the state and federal prisons, not in jail, but between state and federal prisons, there's something close to 37% that are incarcerated. So disproportionately more folks that are black are in custody than their percentage within our country. Some other amazing facts that just are, when you hear it, make you wonder, can that really be accurate? For example, young black men who are 18 to 19 years old now, they have a 1 in 3 chance that they will be incarcerated sometime during their lifetime. When we compare that to white men, it's 1 in 17, which is also a very shocking number. White women, by the way, it's only 1 in 111. So no one would ever expect us to be incarcerating 1 in 3 young black men between the ages that are approximately 19 years old now, sometime during their lifetime. For folks that are in the system, like whether on probation or in some fashion, whether they're in custody, jail, state penitentiary, federal penitentiary, or on paper probation, 1 in 3 black men are in the system. This is important for a lot of reasons. It's not fair, it's number one. Everybody can see that disproportionately, that's just not right. How could that be possible? Well, what is the outcome of that? Well, the outcomes are that at least 62% of those folks that are in prison have children. We know that the children suffer at a greater rate than those whose parents are not in custody from psychological strain, 3 times more evidence that they have antisocial personality problems, much more likely to be suspended from school. Clearly, we know there's going to be economic hardships. They are 6 times more likely to be arrested in their lifetime. They are 2 times more likely to have some type of disability. And we know that there's other problems. These are single-family individuals that are raising the children. There's been a lot of literature about other children will have to provide care sometimes for other siblings in the home because dad may be incarcerated, mom has to work, so you have somebody who's 12 years old taking care of a 5-year-old. We also know that we have children that are exposed to other unrelated male figures that may not be a proper influence for some children. And we know that all this impacts children, and some of this is because they don't have a choice. Their parents were incarcerated or there's something else. We also know that 75% of the people, after they're incarcerated, are not able to find employment for lengthy periods of time. We know that drug overdose is, if not the leading cause of death for people released from prison, shortly after release from prison, is at least one of the top 5. We know that they're not able to get services. They're not able to get public service right away. They're not able to live in restricted housing. They're not able to get student loans. If they are very limited. Sometimes they have custody issues with their own children because they have been forced to register. Their employment opportunities are limited. And we know that in approximately 46 states today, their voting rights are also limited. This all has a continuing cycle, so once somebody's in prison, it continues to be a problem, not just while they're in custody, but after they're out of custody. Once you've had these problems of unemployment, drug addiction continues to be a problem after they get out for a lot of individuals. Mental health is a giant issue. It is estimated that 20% at the minimum for some penitentiaries, for men in general, they have mental health difficulties that they're struggling with, and many of them are not getting treated. For the women, by the way, it's much worse. It's estimated somewhere between 25 and 40% of the women in custody have mental health issues that are not being addressed. So what we know is that when people that are in custody or released from custody, that 68% of them are rearrested within 3 years, 79% are rearrested within 6 years, and 83% are rearrested within 9 years. We know it's a problem. The white people know it's a problem. The black people know it's a problem. In fact, there was a recent study that showed the question was asked, do you believe that the police treat white people better than black people? And 84% of those interviewed that were black said, absolutely, white people are treated better. And the white people agreed. 63% agreed that, yes, we are treated better by the police than black people. What hurt me was that 87% of the black people interviewed believed that the criminal justice system was unfair to black people, and 61% of whites agreed with them. So the question is, why do they believe that? Well, they believe it because they can see the outcomes. We know that there is racial bias. People have bias of all sorts. We know that there's racial bias, and they may not know it. They may not feel it. They may believe that they're a good person, and they hate to admit that they even think that way or feel that way or could even possibly believe there's somebody of color is less than they are. But it happens, and there's been all kinds of mock trials where they've done the same trial with defendants who were black and white, and the outcomes were much different. Everything was exactly, so it was a test to show that, yes, there is some implicit bias. So we know that the juries have implicit bias. I can tell you firsthand, I was representing, before I became a judge, when I started law school, I worked as a probation officer doing juvenile intake while I was in law school, and then after I graduated, I was become an assistant district attorney here in Johnson County, and then I went into private practice, and I did criminal defense work, and then I became a judge. So my exposure to the criminal justice system, which I believe can work and does work, but it does have failures, is for the last 45 years. The mock juries that they did, the one thing that I found when I was reading the studies pretty interesting, the darker the skin, the more likely it was that they would be convicted. So the lighter the skin, the less likely. We also know that judges want to get it right. We know that just like we have all kinds of requirements now that we have implicit bias training. Missouri requires that to continue your law license, and the judges have lots of training on that. Several years ago, I'm guessing it's almost 20 years ago, Minnesota did some studies and found that what we know already, we didn't need a study to show it to us, that there was a disproportionate number of black people sentenced to longer incarceration times than white people. So what they did is they came up with a sentencing structure, sentencing guidelines. And from that time, Kansas has adopted them, the federal courts have adopted them, and the purpose is to make sure that if somebody was convicted of a crime, that they would all be treated the same. It's a matrix. So what happened, you come down, you figure out this is a classification crime, and then you come over and say this is how many prior crimes they have, and so therefore they're in this box, and the sentencing range is this, with the theory being that everybody would be treated the same, regardless of color, that they'd all be in that same box. That was the theory. It just hasn't worked that way, and it's because there's other factors in the system. Anytime you have people, there's going to be human error, there's going to be problems. And I can tell you that I know that the police officers work in the system. I know the district attorneys that work in the system. I know the judges that work in the system want to get it right. But we do have errors. I know that a lot of people that are in custody had public defenders. Many of our public defenders go on to leave the public defender's office and go into private practice. And it's primarily because the public defender's office is a starting point for a lot of individuals. What is depressing for me is that they are state-funded in our state, as in most states. But if you were to have a prosecutor, for example, in Johnson County, who's been out 10 years, and you have a public defender who has stayed in that position for 10 years because he or she has the heart for it, the disparity between their incomes are almost double. So you have to have a heart to want to do that, because otherwise they would leave. But we also know that the public defender's office is overworked. They have too many clients. We know that they don't have the resources that somebody who is wealthy, when they hire their own attorney, the attorney may not be significantly better. But we know that the attorney who is hired is going to have access to hiring experts. They're going to have access to having a private investigator, which seems, by the way, the most important factor for those who are wrongfully convicted, is that was not adequately investigated. And we know that somebody that's in private practice has support staff that can assist them with everything else they got to do to keep that case moving in the right direction. The state-funded public defender's office don't have all those resources. The people who work in the office choose to be there. They choose to work hard, but they are handicapped because they don't have what they need to do a good job. And then when you look at what the legislature has done, well-intended, the war on drugs was something that started in Washington, D.C., and it was drugs were so prevalent in the community, taking and ravaging all citizens, but in particular, young black men. So what we thought we would do is say, you know what, we need to have a zero tolerance. Well, what we've done is, I'll just give you 3 examples of how well-intended laws have really been, the way they're applied disproportionately affects people of color than white people. In Kansas, as well as elsewhere, if you're arrested within, in Kansas, 1,000 feet of a school, your sentence is arrested for selling drugs within 1,000 feet of the school. Your sentence is enhanced. Well, somebody will say, well, that makes sense, that's fair. Well, what happens when you live in a rural community? You could have a drug sale 10 miles away from the nearest school and it wouldn't be a problem. But if you are in a densely populated urban area, it is impossible sometimes not to be within 1,000 feet of a school or a church or a daycare or something along those lines. So what happened is that the urban areas were disproportionately affected by this type of law. Some think that it was set up to make sure that it was done that way because the folks that are in the urban areas there's a higher percentage of blacks than whites. The other thing I think that is more amazing is that cocaine comes initially in a powder form. And cocaine that's used in a powder form at the time that the law was changed and now is more prevalently used by white folks than by black folks. At the time, crack cocaine, which is a rock, you cook it to make it a rock, so to speak, the sentencing for the same chemical is 100 times greater for crack cocaine than powder. It absolutely impacted the black community significantly worse than the white community. There's no indication, by the way, that black people use drugs any more frequent than white people. There's nothing in the literature anywhere ever that would suggest that. So the question is how is it that, by the way, of the people in prison, in federal prison, how is it that 80% of the people in prison are black for a drug offense and only 20% are in custody that are white for the same drug offenses? And the third law I think that really impacted the black community was the 3 strikes, or you hear the 3-strike rule. And at first you would say, again, that makes sense. If you're arrested 3 or more times, you should have to serve longer time. Well, if the playing field were even, I'd agree. But sometimes what happens is we have to look back to the police. Who is stopped more often? Who has frisked more often? Who has more police contact? By a large percentage, black people have more contact with police than white people. Some suggest that it is as high as 4 times more, some say 5 times higher incident of being stopped if you're black than if you're white. And by the way, you can read a lot of studies and you'll have varying figures on a lot of these because for those in custody, the numbers are always changing, especially if you're talking about jails and pre-detention holdings. But the police, again, like I said, the vast majority of them do a great job. The police, like every one of us who are white, that are white police officers, they have some implicit bias. So one of the questions that they asked some recruits early on is, because they have a video, and they said, well, why did you stop this individual? And the response was, he or she looked like a criminal. Now, who do you think that person looked like? Do you think that person looked like me? No. That person was a young black person that looked like a criminal in a lot of these videos. So we know that they are stopped. Well, if you're stopped more often, you do get a chance of having a problem. And I'm going to tell you this, and I really believe it. If any of us were to be followed every day or felt that we're going to be caught doing something wrong. Maybe not signaling when we're going to turn, or we ran a red light or something along those lines. So the more frequency of stops, the greater likelihood that there is going to be some drugs found, some marijuana found, something along those lines, and then we're off and running. The criminal justice system and the prison system is enormous. About $80 billion a year is spent on the prison system. For some states, it's a giant figure that they have to, for a lot of prisons, they don't have enough prison space, and they don't have enough programs to make a difference when folks get out. The people who are in prison, when I first started many years ago, I thought they really was an attempt to rehabilitate. And I know there's still an attempt to do that when you're in custody. But the funds have dried up, just like they have for all the other social needs that we have. And so some of the programs have dried up. They're no longer around. So sometimes these individuals who are in custody are not getting any training they need, or they're not getting the help they need. And for them, it's simply a warehousing process. As I told you a moment ago, that a lot of these individuals have mental health issues. In fact, Sheriff Denning, who was a sheriff before Calvin Hayden, said, and he was absolutely correct, that the Johnson County Jail is the largest mental health hospital in the state of Kansas. And he may very well be right, because we do have other facilities, but when you have, on any daily average, 750 people awaiting in jail, and if 20% of those are in custody, that is a very large mental health hospital. I'm going to close the circle by telling you that I've told you what happened to people in prison. You know that they have kids. We know that there are 5 million children whose parents are in prison. That's 1 in 14. That's for the community in general. 1 in 9 of them are black families. We know that people who are in prison, their children are more likely to be arrested, as I told you a moment ago. And we know that there's a higher likelihood than the general population that they may end up in foster care. In the United States today, there's approximately 450,000 children in foster care. In the state of Kansas, there's about 7,300, 7,400 in foster care. That's a lot. Even a more chilling number is that 30,000 children are released or age out of the program, foster care program, every year. When they're released, 50% of the boys released from the program, from aging out of the program, already have a criminal conviction. 70% of the girls who age out end up being pregnant by age 21. Less than 10% graduate from college, and if you age out of foster care, you are eligible for free tuition at a college. 70% of the children who age out are on government assistance. 20% are homeless on the day they leave. And 25% of those kids are black. And we start all over.
Ooh, that's a lot. And thank you, Judge, for your sharing with us. We knew that the topics that we selected for today are very heavy. Mass incarceration, an example of systemic racism, and unpacking whiteness. It's just a lot. But we know that we don't lose hope. We hold on to hope. And we're grateful for folks like Kevin and Lauren who have passion for these topics, for folks that work like us in this field. We are God's people, and we will not give up. And so while you're allowing that to digest and feel you, we are going to transition from this time together, and we're going to be in Zoom rooms. And there will be Stewart and Lauren in one, and then Kevin and myself will be in another. And we thank you for your attention. We want to let you know that this is session 2, and next week will be the third and final session for the beloved community going deeper. And we are going to focus on how to become anti-racist. And this will be the turning up point, amen, where we make a change, where we're all going to make a change. And So we look forward to that time together. Again, I want to thank you for your presence here. And I pray that as this information seeps in and hits your heart, that you will think about all those who are impacted in a variety of ways when we talk about these topics. Again, thank you to Pastor Lauren. Thank you to Judge Kevin. Thank you, Stewart, partner in crime. Amen. I maybe shouldn't use that term, should I? No.
Tonight.
Okay, not tonight. Amen. And so anything else, any final comments that you all may have?
I'm good.
I guess I'll just say that something that I heard from Ibram Kendi recently really feels like it resonates with turning toward hope, is that, being a part of a system that was built to be racist is like being rained on, and getting knowledge, getting education about it is like being offered an umbrella. That we can start to create little dry spots, spots where things are changing and looking brighter. And if enough of those go around, maybe the rain will stop.
Amen. Amen. Well, we're going to go ahead and end up our time here, and we will meet you all in the Zoom rooms. Thank you again for being with us. God bless you. Bye-bye.